Charney.
Pozdravljeni. Hvala. December 2009 in Stockholm, Sweden. The sky is crisp, clear, and cold as citizens head off for work or do some of their last-minute Christmas shopping. But suddenly the sky is ripped by sound. Car bombs explode at several points around the city. The police, thinking it's a terrorist attack, rush to the scenes of the bombs, and as they do so, a car drives up the only road leading to Sweden's National Gallery of Art, which is on a peninsula into the bay. The riders leave tire spikes behind their car to burst the tires of any cars that might try to pursue them. They pull up in front of the National Gallery, and they get out wearing balaclavas and carrying submachine guns. They rush into the museum, which is full of tourists. They shout them all to the floor and rip paintings off the wall, including a Rembrandt and a Renoir, and they escape out the back by a speedboat that's been waiting for them in the bay. This is not the opening of the new James Bond movie, although it would make a good one. This is, in fact, a real-life art heist of the sort that I study. My name's Noah Charney. I'm an author, professor of art history specializing in art crime, and the founder of ARCA, the Association for Research into Crimes Against Art, an international nonprofit research group. I combine roles as an art detective, art historian, and criminologist when I teach the history of art crime on the ARCA postgraduate certificate program in cultural heritage protection. Today, I'd like to talk to you about art theft. 2009 at the Louvre Museum in Paris. A crazy Russian hurls a mug of tea freshly purchased at the Louvre cafeteria at the world's most famous painting. The mug bounces harmlessly off the bulletproof case that protects Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, and the Russian is quickly carted off. Had the Russian thrown the mug of tea at any other work in the Louvre, it might have done some real damage. But this incident points to some security loopholes in the multi-million-dollar security system that the Louvre boasts. And it also has an interesting connection with an incident that took place about 100 years before, when the Mona Lisa was stolen in 1911 by someone called Vincenzo Peruggia. In 1907, an anarchist slashed a painting by Ingres with a knife at the Louvre, and concerned that the same thing might happen to some other of their most famous works, they commissioned the construction of some glass cases to protect famous works like the Mona Lisa. The firm that was hired to construct these cases had working for them someone called Vincenzo Peruggia. Peruggia was an Italian glazier and painter who had come to Paris in hopes of starting a career as an artist. But he hadn't had much luck, so he made a living as a handyman working for this firm. And suddenly he found himself confronted with the Mona Lisa and access to the Louvre. So he hatched a plan to steal the world's most famous painting. He did so ostensibly to repatriate it to his native Italy, because he was under the impression that the Mona Lisa had been stolen by Napoleonic soldiers during Napoleon's Italian campaign in the 18th century. Now, this was a pretty good guess, because Napoleonic soldiers had stolen tens of thousands of works of art from Italy during this very campaign, many of which are still in the Louvre today. But in this case, Peruggia was mistaken. At the end of Leonardo's life, he lived in France under the patronage of the French king François Ier. And when Leonardo passed away, the French king purchased legally his entire estate. But Peruggia didn't know this. It's 7:15 in the morning on the 21st of August, 1911. Peruggia has spent the night crouched in a dark closet inside the Louvre Museum. His back is creased with sweat, and he waits tense, listening for the footfalls of the night guards as they disappear down the hallway. When he thinks that he's alone, he slips out of the closet, crosses the gallery, and heads to the Mona Lisa. He removes it from the wall carefully inside its frame and retreats to a service staircase. And there in the darkness of the staircase, he removes the Mona Lisa from its frame. He wraps the panel in a white sheet that he brought with him. He tucks it under his arm, and he heads down the stairs, hoping to exit via the Court of the Sphinx and the Visconti exit and to disappear into early morning Paris. When he reaches the bottom of the stairs, he reaches out a sweaty palm and grasps the brass doorknob and twists. But the door does not open. He tries to fight down panic. He thought the door would open from the inside, but just in case he brought tools with him. Using the tools, he removes the doorknob, thinking this will undo the catch and the door will open. He puts the doorknob in his pocket and pushes the door, but it still doesn't open. Peruggia is trapped inside the Louvre, having just stolen the Mona Lisa, and now he hears footsteps approaching on the stairs. Now that I've got you wondering what happened to old Vincenzo, I think I might pause for a moment to talk to you about art crime in general. When most people think of art crime, they think of stories like this: individual, non-violent thieves stealing from famous museums, individual works of art. Then they may have gentlemanly or even ideological motivations behind the theft. People tend to think about Thomas Crown, Dr. No, Cary Grant, and they assume that the people buying these works of art are evil Bavarian counts with exciting facial hair, living in castles in the middle of Europe and cackling maniacally over their collection of stolen art. There have been a few cases that match this description, but such a small number relative to the amount of art crime that happens every year that it's really negligible. There have been perhaps 24 criminal art collectors that we know of. Pablo Picasso is the most famous of them, but we'll save his story for another time. What happens much more often is darker, more sinister, and I think more interesting. Art crime is, in fact, the third highest grossing criminal trade worldwide, behind the drugs and arms trades. And it is a major funding source since the Second World War for organized crime, from small local gangs to large international mafias. And it even funds terrorism. The most famous example was cited in Der Spiegel magazine. They noted that in 1999, Mohammed Atta, who was one of the orchestrators of the 9/11 attacks, flew from Afghanistan to Germany and tried to sell looted Afghani antiquities. When asked why he wanted to sell the antiquities, his response was, very casually, that he wanted to buy an airplane. It seems that one of the early ideas for the September 11th attacks was to buy an airplane using funds generated from looted Afghani antiquities in order to crash it into buildings. It is not just the art that is at stake. We tend to think of a handful of high-profile museum heists that happen each year when we think of art crime, but in fact, there are tens of thousands of artworks reported stolen every year, 20 to 30,000 in Italy alone, and a great many more go unreported. What do you do with stolen art? Well, it depends what sort of art it is. The majority of art crime consists of illicit trade in looted antiquities, and these are antiquities taken literally from the earth or the sea. And for all intents and purposes, they've never existed before to modern man. No one has seen them before they were illegally excavated. So they will never appear on a stolen art registry, and people don't know what to look for. It's the most difficult to police and the most difficult to protect against. They can be sold on an open market with merely a fake provenance, suggesting that they were legally excavated and exported. So they can be sold at full value. But what about these other famous paintings? You're right to think that there really is no market for them. Some famous works may be stolen for ransom back to the victim or their insurance company, as may have been the case with a recent theft from a museum in Rotterdam. Some works are sold, but that is very rare. And what else can happen? Well, because of the involvement of organized crime, we've noted that art can act as a tool within a criminal network in deals between organized crime groups in terms of barter or collateral. And I'll give you an example. When I was teaching a seminar in art crime at Yale University in 2009, there was a local case that was perfect for my students to study. In 2009, a local heroin addict called Dennis Malok stole at least 39 paintings from the greater New Haven area. And now, none of these were very famous, none of them were worth that much, but some were worth a few $1,000s. And yet he traded each one of them for a day or two's worth of heroin, worth maybe $50. He traded them to a local member of an organized crime group named Bruno Nestier. And when the police raided Nestier's house, they found 39 stolen paintings, drugs packaged for sale on the street, unlicensed firearms, and a wad of cash. Here in microcosm, we see the network between drugs, arms, and stolen art. But what about a more famous example? Well, in 1986, a famous Irish gangster named Martin Cahill, about whom films have been made, decided he was going to steal art from Rusborough House. Rusborough House is outside of Dublin, and it has the dubious distinction of having art stolen from it on 4 separate occasions, twice by the IRA. Cahill and his associates stole 18 works of art, including paintings by Goya, Vermeer, and Gabriel Metsu. Cahill thought that he would be able to find a criminal art collector like Dr. No, like he'd seen in the movies. And when he couldn't find anyone, having looked, that is, anyone who he didn't think might be a detective in disguise, he hatched another plan. He smuggled the Goya and the Vermeer to Antwerp, where he traded them with a crooked diamond merchant who gave him a loan in exchange for the paintings of £1 million. The idea was this loan would go to buying drugs wholesale, which Cahill's gang would sell on the street. He'd make a profit, he'd pay back the loan, and retrieve the paintings back to act as collateral in a future such deal. That was what was supposed to happen until the diamond merchant got antsy. He decided, I'm going to sell the paintings myself to a Dr. No type. And he did find someone who would buy them, who turned out to be a Scotland Yard detective in disguise. From that very same crime, the Gabriel Metsu painting was recovered in Istanbul when police raided a deal between two organized crime groups, one trading the Metsu painting for a shipment of drugs. So within this case study, you see arms, drugs, and paintings, each in an interchanging network, paintings used in a barter system for other illicit goods that there is a danger in trying to cash in on, or acting as collateral. The idea is drugs, arms, art, there is a market for them, one assumes, but there's a risk in cashing in on it. So if they're traded one good for another, it erases a cash trail and minimizes risk for the criminals. Now you're probably wondering at this point what happened to our friend Peruggia. If you recall, Peruggia was back in the Louvre. He was locked in. He had a doorknob in his pocket, the Mona Lisa under his arm, and footsteps fast approaching. His heart raced as he awaited who was going to round the corner, and suddenly someone appeared, and it was a plumber. The plumber was doing his morning rounds, and what he saw was someone dressed in a Louvre worker's uniform who had been locked in accidentally overnight, which was not unheard of. There's no record of what he thought about the Mona Lisa-shaped package under Peruggia's arm, or the fact that the doorknob was missing from the door, but he unlocked the door and let Peruggia out. Peruggia didn't encounter any other members of staff. He crossed the court of the Sphinx, he went out the Visconti exit, and the only other person who saw him was a clerk setting up his shop that morning across the street from the Louvre, who thought it was very odd that a Louvre worker should throw a doorknob over his shoulder as he disappeared into early morning Paris. Peruggia would eventually return the painting to Italy. He smuggled it to Florence in the false bottom of a shipping trunk. And he handed it over very proudly to the head of the Uffizi Museum and was very surprised to find himself arrested. He genuinely seemed to think that he would be greeted as a national hero. But this incident helped to make the Mona Lisa the world's most famous painting because it captured international attention and made headlines throughout the process of the theft, the investigation, which was very much bungled, and eventually the recovery after Peruggia brought it himself back to Italy. But it also colored the way we see art crime. One of the interesting phenomena that I discovered in my research that I believe is unique in the world of criminology is that the general public and criminals learn about the art world and learn about art crime through fiction and film and media misrepresentations based on fiction and film. Everyone seems to think that Dr. Noah's and Thomas Crown's really do exist in enough abundance that criminals who steal art, and they steal art very often, that they can find them and sell them for something approaching full value, when in fact, historically, we have a record of very few such individuals, a minimal number, a few dozen, considering there are tens of thousands of art thefts per year. What's interesting here is that knowing the background of knowledge on the part of criminals, police can use that information to help recover works of art. Some of the most famous recoveries, like the recovery of Munch's The Scream and of the Rembrandt that was stolen in my opening story, happened because police disguised themselves as cliched criminal art collectors, just like people saw in the movies, and the thieves fell for it because they were desperate enough they hadn't been able to find anyone matching that description in real life, and suddenly they see someone who turns out to be a policeman in disguise, and that's how some of the major recoveries are made. So I've talked a bit about the sexy, fun, entertaining stories about art crime. Those really do exist, but it represents only a small percentage of what happens in real life in art crime, which is far darker and more sinister. It is not just the art that is at stake. Thank you very much.